What Meghan will do when Dad dies. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. The recent health problems of Thomas Markle Sr., whereby he was hospitalised and underwent an amputation, finding himself in a serious health emergency, has prompted many of you to ask me, what do I think will happen when, at some point, Mr. Markle dies? It's a valid consideration given the seriousness of the recent situation, whereby I think his own son stated that there was a 50-50 chance of survival. Mr. Markle Sr. is not out of the woods yet as he seeks to recuperate. And this has led to many people speculating about what the response of this one's wife might be in the event that her father did pass away at some future point, which of course he will, as we all will, but it was brought into sharp focus as a consequence of the severity of his recent health emergency. The first consideration would be that this one's wife would do absolutely nothing on the occasion of her father dying. She would essentially remain in a position of withdrawal from him and also from criticism. Naturally, there would be certain quarters that would criticise her for having no reaction whatsoever to the death of her father. Others would say, well, given the fact that she was estranged from him over all of those years, is it little wonder she hasn't responded, and at least she's being consistent in that regard. Other people would argue, well, okay, it might be consistent, but the fact is that this is her father, and irrespective of what went down in the later years between them, she naturally, as I have set out in an earlier video, praised him and spoke highly of him. And therefore, if one balances all of that out, that while she may not have wanted to have anything to do with him in the later years, she ought to acknowledge the role that he played in the earlier years and speak out in relation to his death. It's a valid observation, but remember, you're dealing with a narcissist, and a narcissist who has no emotional empathy. And in the circumstances, in the event of her father passing away at some future point, all of the chatter would be about him, which, as you know, the narcissist cannot stand. And therefore, one way of her dealing with that would be to simply ignore it, remain in a position of withdrawal. There will be some quarters that would criticise her for her silence. That would mean that she would continue to remain silent in order to nullify those threats to control. So a potential outcome, in the event of his death at a future point, is that she simply would do nothing. An alternative response would be that we get the grieving narcissist's daughter, that she comes out and the tears flow, the platitudes are issued in relation to her wonderful father, that it was a sadness that they didn't get on in her later years, but she still remembers him for the wonderful father that did A, B, C, D, and E, and that she laps up the opportunity to utilise and hijack his death to make it all about her. It's performative, of course, and it doesn't sit with the fact that she had disengaged from him in more recent years. But again, this could well be typical narcissist behaviour, whereby his death becomes hijacked by her because it's an opportunity for her narcissism to utilise that death for the pursuit of the prime aims. She would seek to elicit sympathy from people, which means that the demonstration of that sympathy would mean that they were brought under control. The expression of sympathy would also provide her with fuel. It would enable her to manage her facade. As being still the dutiful daughter, notwithstanding the falling out, which of course she will maintain was occasioned by him and not her, she was simply protecting herself on her narrative. And therefore, there is a chance that on her father's death, she will immediately don black, get the one tear left eye go operating and milk the situation for all it's worth because her narcissism recognizes that it's a golden opportunity to do so. An alternative outcome relates to the smearing of the memory of Thomas Markle. And this is something that has been aired on numerous occasions, linked to why this one's wife doesn't have any involvement with him now, and also why Harry has never pressed to meet his father-in-law. And this is the suggestion that there has been some form of abuse that has taken place. Now, this becomes a very interesting area, because if this one's wife were to allege that she was the victim of an abusive father, there are immediately a number of factors that spring up in relation to that. First of all, there will be people who say, how can you allege that he was abusive when you spent much of your life praising him? As I set out in my video, if he's awful, why praise him? Time and time again, over a number of years, she issued high praise indeed for him on Father's Day, on Instagram, on X, in interviews. Therefore, if he was abusive, why would she praise him? Of course, there are individuals who are victims of abuse themselves and will explain that notwithstanding the fact that they were on the receiving end of abuse, they would still issue praise towards the abuser. There are various complexities as to why people would do so. Therefore, it doesn't mean that just because somebody praised an individual that abuse didn't take place, but it's bound to be questioned as a consequence of the effusive praise that she's naturally given until the last 7 years in relation to her father. The fact is that if she were to make some abuse allegations, either, for instance, in a book, coming out with a formal statement, or more likely leaking the information to various outlets, Thomas Markle Sr. would not be able to respond because he's dead, and therefore that heads off a potential nullification of a threat to control. Furthermore, you can't defame the dead, so there wouldn't be any actionable circumstances. It would not be a surprise if this one's wife was to make such an allegation, because it would enable her to draw sympathy from certain quarters, which would provide her with fuel, and there's the potential to monetize that also, which of course is a residual benefit. Remember, she is a narcissist devoid of conscience or guilt. But it also raises an interesting further ripple in that it is conceivable that abuse could have taken place and that she's actually telling the truth. Even though she's a narcissist and has a loose relationship with the truth as you understand it to be, as I've explained in my video, the narcissist utilizes the truth, the half-truth, and nowhere near the truth. There are occasions where the narcissist will use the truth as everybody else understands it to be. It's also the case, of course, that the formation of the narcissist arises as a consequence of a genetic predisposition towards narcissism allying with a lack of control environment. And an abusive situation is a lack of control environment. So it raises the possibility that abuse could have taken place, that this was part of what created her narcissism, that she continued to praise her father because it served her purposes to do so by virtue of her narcissism. She has then disengaged from him not because of abuse allegations, but rather, as I've explained in a separate video, because he serves no further purpose and there's a danger that he might expose many of the lies that she's spoken. And in the circumstances, she didn't rely upon the abuse allegations other than perhaps to ensure that Harry didn't ask questions. And she saved this information until his death for the reasons that I've already outlined, namely monetization, drawing of sympathy, and the fact that he can't respond. There is no evidence that abuse has taken place. I'm simply dealing with possibilities of outcomes that have been suggested by many people across comments. And it is a possibility that abuse of some nature could have taken place, and that this one's wife will then use the existence of that for the pursuit of the prime aims. Equally possible is the fact that there was no abuse whatsoever and that her father was a doting father who was supportive, that was the primary caregiver for a number of years in relation to a period when this one's wife was living with him rather than with Doria Ragland, and that the allegations of abuse are entirely spurious. This is also a distinct possibility. It is not beyond the wit of a narcissist to revise history, as you well know. It is not beyond comprehension that a narcissist, in order to assert control over an audience with a view to drawing sympathy, to draw fuel by way of that sympathy, to exact monetization from it, could conjure up lies about having been abused, and when the alleged abuser is dead, they cannot defend themselves. They cannot bring a suit for defamation, and therefore the narcissist has free rein to make the allegations. It then becomes rather complicated, as people will say, this is typical behaviour of a narcissist, telling lies about her father when there's no evidence to support it. Other people will say, a victim ought to be believed, irrespective of what they are. They allege abuse, you should listen to them. So many people have been unable to speak out for years because of that attitude of, I don't think I will be believed. Others might suggest, she spoke so highly of him for so many years, how can she now say that she was abused? Again, there'll be those that are victims of abuse that will say, I still love my father notwithstanding what he did to me. It isn't so straightforward as to suggest that just because somebody's abusing you, you actually end up hating them. It all makes for a very complex mix. But what I can tell you with absolute certainty is that it will be this one's wife's narcissism that governs her behaviour. Whether she remains silent on the death of her father, whether she plays the grieving daughter, or whether she comes out with allegations of abuse, all of those outcomes will be driven by her narcissism. And it's interesting, as many of you have asked me, to consider the potential outcomes in relation to what this one's wife would do when her father dies. What do you think would be likely to happen on that event occurring? Do you agree with my analysis? Do you see that there might be an alternative outcome? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.